This Labour government has turned itself into a very unpopular government much more quickly than anything I've ever known. So there is an audience out there.
One of few MPs in both the Britannica Encyclopedia and on IMDb, Sir John Redwood served as the MP for Wokingham for 37 years between 1987 and 2024, as well as Secretary of State for Wales and Minister of State for Trade and Industry. Prior to venturing into politics, he studied modern history at Magdalen before becoming chief policy advisor to Margaret Thatcher, encouraging her to adopt privatisation. Now a global investment strategist, political commentator, and author of John Redwood's Diary, Sir John Redwood is also a distinguished fellow of All Souls College in Oxford. And we are delighted to have him here with us today on ModCon. Sir John, thank you so much for joining me today.
Well, hello, everybody, and I look forward to our conversation.
Thank you. So you famously stood, I'm going to get straight into it. So you famously stood against Sir John Major in the 1995 leadership contest saying no change, no chance, which ultimately did turn out to be true. Why did you think you were the right man for the job?
Well, I was the one who had consistently explained to John Major in private that joining the European exchange rate mechanism would be very damaging to the British economy and therefore to Conservative electoral chances. And he persevered with it and was doing very predictable damage. So it's quite obvious to me we were losing our reputation for economic competence. We were doing damage to people's businesses, lifestyles, and mortgages, and that we needed a desperate change. So I felt when he said that if anybody thought they could do better, they should say so. I thought, well, I do think I could do better than you're doing because it's such a disaster.
Yeah, fair enough. He did ask, to be fair. So you actually tweeted this morning. I've been on your Twitter already this morning. You tweeted, why does the government do so much to boost imports and so much to run down industry and jobs at home? Do you think that is this government? And if not, why do you think that is? Is it just foreign policy posturing?
Well, it's a bit of foreign policy posturing. It's also an extreme interpretation of net zero policies. The last government wasn't pure on all that. Some of its policies were unhelpful. But this government decided to double down on the policies that were most damaging. For example, we're not allowed to get our own oil and gas out. We have to import other people's oil and gas and burn it instead. And that means more world CO2. It's completely crazy. For example, their motor car policy, which I was highlighting today, they're now offering £650 million of subsidies, mainly for people to buy imported cars that happen to be run on batteries, whilst they're charging a very high tax on a British motor manufacturer that dares to make a petrol or diesel car that people want to buy. And everything they do is deindustrializing us. The energy is too dear. Relying on interruptible energy is not a good idea. And then they conceal the cost and the subsidies from the British public.
Oh, you're a drill, baby, drill kind of guy.
I believe that we've got excellent gas resources we're not tapping, and I think it's good for the environment we tap them because it will mean much less CO2 than bringing in liquefied natural gas with all the extra energy it takes to liquefy and transport it. And why on earth deny us the jobs and the tax revenue? I mean, they tax oil and gas massively. But now, as they close ours down, that tax revenue is going to go abroad to America and Qatar and the other suppliers. Again, it's just crazy.
You were an advisor to Margaret Thatcher, encouraging her to pursue privatisation. What would your advice be to Kemi Badenoch?
Well, I think Kemi's doing a great job, and I think she's got some talented senior colleagues who are now beginning to cut through. It's not easy in your first year or so after a major defeat, because people aren't that keen to hear from you. They say, look, well, we heard from you for rather a long time. We want to hear from the new guys and girls. And I think she's beginning to cut through on the things that need to be cut through on. And I will be arguing to her and to her colleagues, as I am, that we need a much more free enterprise, lower tax approach to growth and to getting prosperity back in this country. I thought the Labour government would be poor, but I didn't expect it to be this bad. I mean, everything Rachel Reeves has done, the higher taxes and the bans and the interventions in markets, have made things worse. And hospitality, which was a great industry for us, which created a lot of jobs for young people, particularly helped people without many skills or good educational background in some cases, has been decimated by the high national insurance And so we now have unemployment up, vacancies down, the very opposite of what we did when we had too many people on welfare.
Absolutely. And do you think there's just been like too much tinkering around the edges? Obviously, we saw under Sunak, Nicks go up, and then under Hunt, Nicks go down, and then Rachel Reeves employ Nicks. Do you think that we just need to radically reform the way we are taxing people?
Well, we need to get taxes down. We have too many taxes and rates of tax that are too high. Particularly rates of tax that are too high. We see the millionaires queuing up to get out of the country now. The way to tax the rich, and you do need to tax the rich, is to charge them taxes they can afford to pay and they're willing to stay to pay. The rich have all sorts of options other people don't have. They may have a property abroad already. They can go and live somewhere else. They can set up a company in a different country. That's what they're doing. You need to get the rates down. That was something that Margaret Thatcher and Nigel Lawson fully understood. I was egging them on, and there they were. They took our marginal rate of tax for the rich down from an astonishing 98% Marxist confiscation to 40%. And you know what happened? We got a lot more rich people here, and we collected an awful lot more tax from the rich. That is the way to tax the rich. Sensible rates of tax. They come, they stay, they pay, they invest, they take risks.
I agree with that. And I think the problem is that we saw over the last decade a lot of people kind of abusing the system. So buying lots of property in the UK and then not living in it. Do you think that kind of narrative has damaged the actual facts of don't overtax people or they will leave?
Well, the politics of jealousy is always attractive to a minority, but I don't think you can ever win a national election on it. And I think Labour are going to discover this unless they change their tack pretty quickly. Maybe 20 or 30% of the public really hate the rich and don't think they should have all the privileges they've got. And my answer to them is, well, you may not like it, but they're going to be rich, but they won't necessarily be rich here. And
That's so true.
It's better if you let them be rich here. I mean, we sold them flats they didn't need, but that created jobs because people had to maintain the flats and supply services to the flats in case they turned up to visit and all the rest of it. The Germans sold them very expensive cars they didn't need because they usually had more than one car. But that wasn't quite such good business because somebody else then pocketed the money from the maintenance and the fuel and all the rest of it for the vehicle. So in some ways, the British model of selling them smart flats was quite a good one. I didn't get jealous about it, although I couldn't afford one of the really smart flats myself.
Fair enough, fair enough. And I think we've heard like recently lots of nannies and cleaners, they are now, it's not just the first jobs that are being affected, it's the people who are in those service industries as well. They're kind of left in the lurch by Rachel Reeves.
Yeah, and the posh shops and all the rest of it, you know, and the posh restaurants, they get hit if you don't have rich people coming here anymore.
Absolutely. And we're also seeing a lot of our own talented millionaires leaving. I always talk about Stephen Bartlett, millionaire founder, young entrepreneurs leaving because they don't feel like this country is really supporting their innovation and also the risks that they've taken. I wrote recently in an article that any incoming Conservative government would need to robustly prioritise the millennial vote. And that will mean being bold on housing, trimming fat and welfare, quangos, the NHS, and presumably pensions. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, my thoughts are that, yes, we need to offer more to young people. I think it's dreadful that so many young people can't afford a house of their own in their 20s or their early 30s in the way that my generation did manage to do. It's true that the properties are quite a lot dearer, but it's also true that the mortgage rates are lower than when my generation was setting out. But there's something in the atmosphere which means that people feel they can't do this and they may need more help. And it would be much better if we had lower mortgage rates by running our public finances better. The main reason our mortgages are so high compared to continental interest rates is the state of the public finances in Britain. So we do need to work away at that. But I also don't want to put off the older people who have made some money. It's not a sin to have made some money over your life to provide for your old age. And so you mustn't be so penalising in their taxation that they leave as well, because older people may set up companies, they may back people in their family to do better things. They've got the money to help. Let's not knock it. In terms of state expenditures, and the main welfare reform has to be getting hundreds of thousands of people into jobs who are currently claiming benefits. I think all the parties agree about that. The argument is about how far you go and how tough you are in the measures to achieve that. And on the state retirement pension, no, I wouldn't, for example, take the triple lock away. People value that promise, and a lot of the Conservative vote is elderly. What I've suggested it successfully to the incoming Cameron government, and would suggest it again to an incoming Conservative government, is you delay the age at which people can get the state pension. And if you add 1 year, it's say something like 7% of the total bill. And if people find that too difficult, I would say, well, then you could introduce a sweetener to that, and you could say that, well, all right, if you really want to retire a bit earlier than everybody else, you can do so, but you need to pay more in your last decade in order to justify it.
Yeah, that's a good idea. So paying more in. What would be the solution for, I guess, people who don't have much more to pay? Is it a case of more like pension credits and things like that? And then are we getting into a state where we're just subsidizing them anyway?
Yes, you can't avoid that because you don't want poverty. And some people have a lot of bad luck, or don't have the abilities, or they have disabilities, which means they can't stack away enough money from private saving during their lifetime. But I think we can do more, as the previous government was doing, to promote lifetime savings so that everybody gets to retirement, not just with a state retirement pension, but also with some private pension as well. And the more we can succeed in getting people to save for a private pension, the less they will need benefit top-ups.
I think that's definitely the way to go. Now, you are an ardent Brexiteer, and now we've already seen the value of our independence in the vaccine rollout and our dealings with Trump. But what other opportunities should we be taking advantage of, and what is your vision for Brexit Britain?
Well, there are massive opportunities, and one of the big wins we've already had that doesn't get reported is that the EU is going on its own borrowing binge, and it's in the process of borrowing 800 billion euros. The UK share of that would have been, say, 120 billion. Well, we don't need another 120 billion of state debt. We got quite enough of our own. So we have helped our public finances a lot, not just by saving the very big contribution we had to make, contribution which is going up a lot now for those still in, but we've also saved on this borrowing. But on the trade side, I mean, I'm still frustrated because although the last government did get rid of quite a lot of tariffs on things we can't make for ourselves or we can't grow for ourselves, there's still more of those things that we could take it off. I mean, why is there a tariff on orange juice? Because I don't see many orange groves despite the fabled global warming. So I think you need to do more to get cheaper imports from around the world, because we still seem to be part of the EU model, where we have to import everything from EU countries who aren't necessarily the cheapest, fastest, best. And we still have quite a lot of barriers against the rest of the world for things that they could do better for us. And I would also like us to be even more energetic in promoting service sector agreements. We're doing quite a lot of that now in our new trade agreements, but the EU hardly ever did good service sector chapters in their trade agreements, and they didn't have many trade agreements. Our huge success since we left has been our service sector exports have absolutely taken off. We've gone from being the fourth biggest service exporter in the world to being the second biggest exporter in the world. And there's been phenomenal growth. We've even grown our services to Europe, which is quite difficult because of different languages and so forth. But this is a great British opportunity, which we can build rather more into the trading system. But also, I would cut loose from a lot of their net zero policies. And I think the government's idea that we need to join their emissions trading scheme and their carbon taxation is an absolute nightmare for us. That will complete the deindustrialization the government's currently embarking on.
I guess the problem is that we have a government that just wants to cozy up to the EU, so they're not necessarily going to see these opportunities. Is that the danger? Or are we going to waste 3 or 4 years kind of waiting to get rid of Starmer and his clan?
Yeah, I think it's worse than you've rather kindly said. I mean, I think they are deliberately aligning us with the European Union and making it very difficult, for example, to deregulate in a sensible way, because we're now going to have to align with their rules, not just in Northern Ireland, but in quite a few areas, industry and particularly agriculture, in order to have this so-called reset. Well, that isn't what we voted for. We voted for fewer and better rules, not for this massive panoply of European controls and rules which are extremely costly and very damaging. I just look at the way GDPR at the moment is now apparently stopping people highlighting those who are shoplifting in our shops and doing damage to our local stores. Well, we don't need that kind of legislation.
Yeah, I actually had that question down. It feels like nanny state has gone mad.
Yeah, well, it's the European nanny state that we've lived with, having adopted it when we were in the EU. And I wanted, and quite a few of my colleagues in the last Parliament wanted, a much more fundamental rewrite of our laws. Now we had the opportunity, because we had two governments for the price of three when we were in the EU. We had a whole load of domestic laws and then a whole load of European laws on top, and they were always, of course, the superior ones. So there was a lot of padding and too much complexity and so forth. And I think we need to do a proper exercise on that. This government now says it wishes to deregulate how business. Well, that's a great idea. But you can't do that, Sir Keir, and at the same time sign up to a reset, which means not only accepting all the rules that Europe's already imposed, many of them not very helpful, but an automatic requirement that we impose all their new rules and we're not even allowed to have a vote on it. I mean, it's just bonkers.
So true. It's like he is, as we say, he is just the worst negotiator ever. You can just tell they see him coming.
Yeah, I'd love to negotiate with him. You just have a wish list and then you double it and you get it.
Yeah, you just get what you want. As long as he can go up into the House of Commons and say, I've got a great new deal, he doesn't really care what's in it.
Well, take Mauritius. I mean, they bagged the Chagos Islands for free, and then they realised he's so weak. They said, oh, by the way, we want to shed a load of money as well. And he says, yeah. Well, how much?
Can we pay you every year? So you actually you were the Minister for Deregulation at a time. Where has that position gone? And do you think that we really need that more than ever now?
Yes, I think we need it more than ever, and it only works if the Prime Minister is fully committed to it and has a senior minister leading it. It's probably best led from the Cabinet Office. It's the kind of thing Pat McFadden could do if Starmer was serious about it. But it's got to be across government, and you've got to both get the relevant committee working away, and you've got to work individually with departments looking at their own burdens and saying, well, these are the most obvious ones that we could get rid of with more upside and little downside.
It feels like that we're a long way off from deregulation being the kind of modus operandi. So going back to kind of Oxford, you not at Oxford at the time, but you spectacularly debated Jeremy Corbyn at the Oxford Union, and he sat there like a sourpuss the entire time. As has been well documented, he is launching a new party with Zara Sultana. And in your book, I Want to Make a Difference, but I Don't Like Politics, you examine the reason for the decline in membership of political parties. However, if you look at the parties of Corbyn and Farage, Reform is on 232,000 members. Corbyn has over 600,000 sign-ups. And obviously they're not paid up members, but at his peak, the Labour Party under Corbyn had about 564,000 members. So is it therefore fair to surmise that people will join parties, just not parties of the centre?
Well, I think they will join what look like exciting political movements to make a point. I mean, it's really all part of their attack on the traditional governing parties. And the traditional governing parties, right, left and centre, all have the same problem, that the realities of government constrain you. Nasty things occur that you are responsible for, even though you didn't want them or had nothing to do with them. And you are responsible for the output of what is turning out to be now a pretty incompetent general governing machine, with productivity collapsing since 2019 and quality of some services not up to standard. And so, yes, these movements of the right or left, and I don't know whether Farage is of the right or left, he's a bit of both. There's nothing wrong with that, but it makes it more difficult to characterise. So they will attract, because people are trying to make a message to the existing government and to the potential alternative government. We've seen in the past some of these parties do extremely well for a period, but then they don't go on to win a general election. It's still a very big challenge in a first past the post system to break through in the way imagined. But the two main parties of old are now languishing in polls, and they've got to adjust to this world of 4 or 5 party politics in Britain, not 2 party politics.
Do you think in that case it's kind of just going back to your authentic roots of who you are? Because I was listening to the radio the other day and someone was like, I just feel like the Labour needs to be Labour and the Conservative need to be Conservative and that will solve this. Is it that simple?
Well, I think that would help. Yes. I think people like to know what they're buying. And I think the last Conservative government went down to a resounding defeat, mainly because its own voters went on strike because they didn't think it was Conservative enough. There were arguments within the Conservative Party at the time. Some of them thought we weren't attractive enough to people who might otherwise vote Liberal Democrat. But if you look at the polling, the Liberal Democrat vote nationally was still pretty disappointing. They've got much better at targeting where they actually got more votes to win seats. But what did happen was the Conservative vote literally halved, and half of that half went to Farage, and half of the half stayed at home, sending a very big message, I think, to the Conservative Party that you are not authentic. You didn't deliver on lower taxes and lower migration, two of the key pledges that people expect from a Conservative government.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And obviously your seats, Wokingham went Lib Dem, obviously after you stood down. Do you think that the area, the constituency, is a Lib Dem constituency?
In Wokingham, the Lib Dem vote was about the same as when I beat them. So the issue was on the Conservative side of the equation. I'm typically in Wokingham, about a third of the electors are pretty long-term Lib Dems. That's the underlying position. So as long as the Conservatives can mobilise 40% of the vote or more, then there should be a comfortable win. That was what I usually managed to do in 9 different general elections. And most of the time I had more than 50% of the vote, which was even more comfortable. So a new candidate fighting it next time around has got to work out not how to get some of the Lib Dems to switch votes, because I don't think there were many people voting Lib Dem who would want to vote Conservative. They've got to find out all those missing Conservatives because the turnout was poor. And they've got to persuade the Farage voting Conservatives that they've now got the right answer.
And that's quite challenging, isn't it, really? Like when you have a history. So we have a good history and we also have a more recent history that people aren't happy with. And when you're no longer in power and you have an opposition on the right who or left that is saying everything that they're going to fix everything that you did wrong, it's very hard to prove that you actually have the solutions the second time around or whatever time around it is now. How do you think we work on that? How do we convince people that we are to be trusted again?
Well, I think that the Conservatives have to do a substantial, serious rebuild. And I think that's exactly what Kemi is embarking on, in the way that Margaret Thatcher and Keith Joseph did in 1974. Because in the 2 defeats in 1974 for the Conservatives were because they'd conducted bad economic policy and they'd ceased to be Conservative. They'd imposed income and prices policies which didn't work instead of liberating enterprise to do a better job. And taxes were a bit high. Labour then made it far worse. And the reason that it was successful was it was a serious rethink, but also it was that the Labour government was so bad from 74 to 79 that people were prepared then to give the Conservatives a hearing again. Now, I think that's exactly what's happening now. I think people are wanting something different from their current government. Indeed, this Labour government has turned itself into a very unpopular government much more quickly than any I've ever known. And its unpopularity is enormous. I mean, here is a party with a huge majority in Parliament that can't command 20% of the electorate, just disaster levels. So there is an audience out there. So it's going to be very interesting to see how Farage and his team, and Farage obviously has some great phrases and he's identified 2 or 3 of the obvious things that annoy people, how that contrasts with the Kemi Badenoch rethink. And she has the advantage that she leads the official opposition, so they make the response to everything first in the House of Commons. She's got 120 odd MPs, so that enables her to have rather more people helping her, advising her, and it enables her to project an image of not a one-party, one-person situation, but someone who can form a government tomorrow if need arose. And so she needs to bring on, as I think she's doing, her talent in the House of Commons and show that there are a dozen people who could be the people who filled all the really important, serious jobs in the country, and that would be the way she would fight back.
And who do you think are the new economic thinkers on the right, like the new Keith Joseph, the new Sir John Redwood? Who's out there doing the deep thinking that we need to?
Well, I think it's being led by two people in the Conservative Party. It's obviously being led by Mel Stride, who is Shadow Chancellor, who's important. He's made one or two, I think, good interventions recently about what's wrong with current Labour policy. And I think Alex Burkhardt is a very important figure. He's close to the leader, and he's helping organise the rethink, and he takes a very serious interest in the main economic argument, because he recognises, as I'm sure you and I do, that you've got to win back your reputation for economic competence. And that was something we lost over the tax rises, and particularly over the Bank of England's mistake on inflation. And I think the last few years demonstrate that whilst the bank clearly has an independent power to set interest rates, which none of us are suggesting we take away, when it makes a big mistake, as it did, the government gets blamed.
Changing tax slightly, you oversaw the abolition when you were in government. You oversaw the abolition of the poll tax community charge, which was very controversial when you were a minister for local government. What was that time like? Have we seen public fury like that since? Is that what we're kind of feeling now when it comes to immigration, or was it much, much worse?
No, I think the public fury on immigration is wider spread and even worse than the public fury over the levels of the community charge, or the poll tax, as Labour very sensibly dubbed it, which helped kill it. I mean, my history on that was as Margaret's chief advisor. When they thought about that, I advised her not to do it. And it was one of the rare occasions when she didn't like my advice. So I allocated another advisor to help her with the poll tax, because I couldn't bring myself to do it. I didn't want to undermine her, obviously. It didn't surprise me it went wrong, because the Treasury shortchanged it and it came in at too high a level for people. And that was a stupid mistake, which cost them very dearly. When I had the task of producing something else, I developed the council tax, which had elements for property tax and elements for personal tax. And I was told it couldn't possibly succeed, and I was booked into all the main media slots for the February when they were expecting the whole thing to explode. So I just said, I didn't come into politics to put in a new tax. I don't like taxes. When you ask me, is this going to be a popular tax? No, it's not going to be a popular tax. All taxes are unpopular. We don't want to pay more money. But it is what it is. And my message to local government is, if you don't accept this one, you won't have a tax at all, and then you'll be in a worse position. And I think enough of them accepted that, so it went through. I wasn't thanked by John Major for taking this approach. And I said, well, if you want me to do this job, I'm going to do it in the only way I know how, which is to explain that this is a rotten deal, but it's not as bad as the deal we're replacing.
I think people like that. They prefer honesty. And I think our politicians need to do that more in the media, instead of kind of prevaricating. Just be honest. We're like, it's not the best, but it's better than the alternative.
Yeah, it worked for me. And I also found in the House of Commons that when your opposition were rightly making some good points about something you were doing, it was quite disarming if I stood up and said, yeah, you're quite right. Those are downsides of this policy. I thought about all those, but these are the downsides of your policy, which I thought were even worse. It's the least of the evils. How about it? And it's much more difficult to handle somebody who's prepared to concede like that. And a lot of government decisions are not ideological. They're not must-haves. They're not obvious. You've got to make a difficult decision with inadequate information. And you can see downsides in what you're doing. So I think sometimes it's very sensible to just admit it's like that.
So you were an Oxfordshire County Councillor, and the youngest ever at the age of 21 when you were elected. So you must be all for young people in politics. How about an 18-year-old running a county council? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, if he or she's good at it, I'm all for it. But they've got to be good, haven't they? I found doing things as a young man, you had to be that much better, because people started a bit sceptical.
That's it. Well, people
it was even funnier when I went as a relatively young minister to Japan, and I took with me my senior official, who was a lady. And they didn't then take young people or women very seriously. And so the person who got the biggest bows was the elderly driver we were given.
I love that.
we had great giggles over that.
I'm sure he loved being like the VIP for the day.
Yeah, it's all good fun.
Amazing, amazing. So, Sir John, you are a proud and long-standing Conservative. Why are you a Conservative?
Well, I'm a conservative because I believe in my kind of conservatism. I haven't always found my party shares all of my beliefs in this respect, but I've always thought I'm more likely to get what I want from the Conservative Party than I would from Labour or the Lib Dems, obviously. But because, as we've been discussing, I want prosperity and greater happiness and greater freedom. Of course, I'm very much in favour of looking after the disabled and helping people who are in trouble and having a decent welfare safety net and all that kind of thing. But I do believe that lower tax rates, simpler regulations, government only doing the things that government really needs to do, always produces a better outcome in terms of prosperity and personal freedom. And the evidence abounds around the world. When I'm talking to this government, you say you need to align more with Europe in order to get growth. Have you noticed that GDP per head in Europe is now one half the level of GDP per head in America? Isn't that a scandal? Doesn't that show that for the last 25 years at least, the European model has been slow growth and no growth? It's been a disaster for the European peoples. And the American model, based on a bit more free enterprise and lower taxes, and particularly based on this amazing digital revolution, is providing so much more prosperity. Surely that's what we need to be following.
Well, I think we'll leave it there because that is a great note to leave it on. And hopefully that we as a Conservative Party can continue to fly the flag for optimism in enterprise. And I guess I'll have one more question quickly. Where would you like the Conservative to be in 4 years and what gives you hope?
Well, I'd like us to be in a position where enough people think we have a decent chance of winning the election with a range of really good, often younger candidates who believe in the things I believe in. That's what I want.
Well, Sir John, thank you so much for joining us today.